Today we have Mike Hoevenaars. Mike is a management consultant with over 30 years of experience. He's gained that experience during periods of rapid growth and change, including IT service management, all aspects of governance, strategic planning, and numerous projects large and small. Mike is a leader with demonstrated ability to turn strategy and vision into results with a progressive approach to process improvement and next level growth. Mike is currently consulting for JEMI, helping management teams turn their strategy and visions into results, leveraging the best practices of ITIL. Mike specializes in best practices in project management, including governance, risk, and organizational change management. And for now, I will turn things over to Mike. If you have questions, as Jeannie mentioned during the presentation, please pop those into the question panel, and I'll ask them as we go through the presentation when I can find an appropriate moment to pose those questions to Mike. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, John, for that very welcoming introduction. As John mentioned, I've been around the IT world and project management world for a number of years, and I do have a lot of war wounds to show for it. And I'm sure that many of you have been well aware of the terrible stats for project success. And even after decades that we spend learning and implementing project management practices and methodologies, we have put in place measurements, controls. The success rate of projects, specifically large IT projects, is not much better today than it was in the 80s and 90s. And survey after survey seems to point to communication as the guilty party. For some reason, communication seems to continually elude us. I would like to suggest one possible reason for the poor communication and hence our project failures, lies in the disconnected treatment of the goal, triple constraints, and the plans and execution of the projects. And what I want to and plan to give you today is some insights into these disconnects, or what I call communication gaps that organizations and projects can experience. Gaps that will cause projects to fail to meet the customer expectations and the stakeholder expectations. And I'll provide you with the means of applying some of the fundamental principles that improve on how your ITIL CSI initiatives can gain better success. Based on this presentation is based, as John said, on a white paper that was co-authored by Mike Addario and Lloyd. And it was originally published in the fall of 2001 in the issue of the Marriott Alumni magazine at the Marriott School of Management and Brigham Young University. And it contains some very basic processes in there that I'd like to talk about regarding establishing the typical project's rules of engagement, or what we call the drivers that will guide and direct your projects. Now remember, influence on every project go far beyond the project itself and into the behaviors and influences of the organization. And it is when these two forces interact, while there's a disconnect between the goals, your triple constraints, and your plans, that is when the project results suffer. I want to start first with getting an understanding of some of the forces that are in play within any project. And we'll start with some of the basic concepts found in project management. I'm sure many of you are well aware of this. But project management and the PMBOK defines a project as being temporary, in that it has a defined beginning and end in time, and therefore its scope and its resources are constrained as well. A project is also unique in that it's not a routine operation, but it has a specific set of tasks and operations that are assigned to accomplish a singular goal. So often a project team includes people that don't usually work together. They're sometimes from different parts of the organization or across various geographies altogether. The project rules of engagement typically comes from the executive sponsor who establishes the goals, and from these goals we negotiate and agree upon the constraints, which are the triple constraints of budget, scope, and schedule. And then finally, we build the plans, which are based on those constraints for execution. Now, once we establish these rules of engagement, we generally don't go back and revisit the rules of engagement. It's generally discouraged in most projects. An organization, on the other hand, is permanent. Its scope spreads across the top, representing all the functions of an organization. You have manufacturing, accounting, information services, and customer services. As we go down through the organization, it provides us an increasing level of detailed activities within each function of the organization. Now, we generally see three basic layers in every organization. There's the executive layer, where the senior executives know a lot about the organization and its activities, its functions. However, they don't know a great deal about the details and how each one operates. For example, they would know why information services exist, but they wouldn't really know how to answer a help desk call. When it comes to influencing a project, schedule is generally the driver that typically dominates at the executive level. For example, an executive will announce the delivery date of a product launch, and that may happen before the project manager has even developed any plans to produce the product. And also all the plans and execution for the project is left to the other layers. The operational layer, it's the middle managers who understand what their functional areas do. For example, software development manager, he knows the process behind debugging Java code, but would not be expected to do the task of programming. When it comes to the influences on a project, cost is the dominant influence in the operational layer. Middle management face constant challenges of controlling costs by whatever means, including downsizing, reorganizing, and generally attempting to do more with less. And finally, the technical layer. That's generally the largest group of the organization, and it's made up of non-management workers, technicians, skilled and non-skilled labor. There's no group in the organization with deeper knowledge. These people are responsible for knowing how to perform specific project-related tasks, such as the design, the development, the testing. These people are responsible for producing the product. They may have spent years perfecting their trade, and they want to ensure that their product is a reflection of their skills and their talent. This makes performance to be the highest priority for this group, and that's the most dominant influence at the technical layer. So as a project plays out, we see interesting and sometimes very dangerous consequences that happen as the dynamics of the project interact with the dynamics of internal, external, or behavioral influences of the organization. And without the links between the triple constraints, the plans, and the goals, conflict will arise.
Mike, we have a question from Jane on that. So how do you establish the linkage between goals, constraints, and plans and executions?
Well, it's a process that we go through, and I want to step you through that right now, if you may. And we start with the center of it all, which is the triple constraints. So let me take a look at that. The triple constraints is, I'm sure everybody has seen this triangle. This triangle shows up in many different forms and ways. But what is most common about this is that it clearly represents the concepts that teach us to continually monitor and adjust the competing elements within a project. And we use various devices to control these competing elements of scope, budget, and schedule, such as change control, issue and risk management, and so on. But sometimes it's almost to the point of bureaucracy, and often it's fueling the conflict between the project goal and the execution plans. So if we take a look at this triple constraint, I would like to suggest that we change this and reshape it into a 3x3 matrix. And with this, we now have the opportunity to link it to our goal and our plan. Let me show you a little bit more how. First, we begin by labeling the y-axis, which we call the effort elements. Now, you would notice that I changed the word scope with performance, and this allows me to not only talk about the project scope elements, but also quality, features, deliverable benefits, and so on. That is all part of performance. And then we go to the X element, X-axis, and we call them the management elements. Maximize, constrain, and accept. Now, we complete the model by selecting an X and Y axis intersection for each effort and management element. So for example, if we want to maximize the performance of the project, we would select an X there. And once we select one X in that row and column, the others cannot be selected. Then we go to cost, or then we go to schedule, and we decide that we want to constrain schedule and maximize and accept cost. So now we've established what we call the rules of engagement. Now, there's no right or wrong way to align rules of engagement, only that they have to be set.
Mike, we have another question here.
Yes.
Is it the case where rules of engagement can or are changed when a project's underway?
Can the rules of engagement be changed when a project is underway?
Mm-hmm. Does that happen?
Yes, it does, and it can happen. But we have to be careful on how we communicate the change as we go forward. And I'll provide you with an example later on how that can happen and what can happen if rules of engagements change and it is not communicated properly. So if we go on and we try to then move on to linking this triple constraints to our goal statement, we'll start looking at what the goal statement should look like. The most important part of the goal statement is that it has to be clear. It has to be clear and well defined. And we can find examples, and I got one really good example coming up on how a goal statement can be defined. I'm sure that everybody's well aware of the mission to the moon and back in the 60s. And John Kennedy announced a very clear goal to the nation. And let's listen to what
I
your
believe
choice.
that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Now, what can be more clear than that? So in tying this goal statement to our new triple constraints cube, let's see how that will look.
Hey, Mike, we have another question before you do that.
Sure.
Sorry. Who's responsible and how do they set those rules of engagement?
The responsibility, ultimately, if you look at the Archie matrix, the accountability of the rules of engagement lies with the sponsor. The sponsor is accountable for setting those rules of engagement. The rules of engagement are generally negotiated across the project team, and often the project manager is the one that is responsible for coordinating that negotiation between the teams on whether whether it's maximizing performance and accepting costs. But generally, the rule of engagement is accountable by the sponsor. Now, this isn't an easy matter at all, I'm sure. I would think that a lot of you would be thinking that, how do you get your sponsor to even accept this level of structure within your organization? And it's not going to be easy. I know that in my experience, it was a very significant mindset shift within the steering committees of the organization, but it is a necessary thing to complete and accomplish nonetheless. So, sorry, as we move along with the linking the goals, so let's get back to the goal statement that John Kennedy established here. And so what he said was, we'd like to return him safely to Earth. And that was clearly a performance goal. We want to maximize performance. And if they did not return safely to Earth, the project would be deemed a complete failure. And then he said, we'd like to commit ourselves. And that statement indicated that they will do whatever it takes to get it done. And that meant Congress basically writing a blank check to NASA. And finally, he stated, before this decade was out. That's 9 years that he was expected to have this completed. So for almost 9 years, NASA ran every aspect of their project, from the Mercury to the Gemini project, all through the Apollo project, with this very clear goal driving their every decision. And as a result, on July 16, 1969, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin began their journey, and on July 20th, Armstrong and Collins walked on the moon, and all three of them returned safely on July 24th, 1969. A clear example of a successful project with a clear goal tied clearly to the triple constraints. Now let's take a look at another example. As we move on to the shuttle business, the business has changed in many ways. And first, Congress was no longer disposed to writing blank checks to NASA. They had other priorities, and Congress was now told that this would be a low-cost, reusable technology. So in this project, costs was now being constrained. And the laws of the triple constraints were broken. Still, NASA needed to respond. And 9 flights were scheduled in 1985. 14 flights were scheduled in 1986. And in January 86, the Columbia was launched. January 28th, 86, the Challenger was launched. And 30 seconds later, it was lost after liftoff.
So we have a couple questions, Mike. First, I'll go backwards a bit, potentially. So if we are talking about ITIL efforts, then why are you not mentioning Cotter? And also, I'd more a comment, the second part, not getting buy-in and not establishing quick wins will kill the effort. So one's a question, I think one's a comment. So maybe back to the question, if we're talking about ITIL efforts, why no mention of Cotter?
In what way?
Well, we'll pose that question back and why don't you carry on, and I'll give you a minute for the person who posed the question to let us know. And then just coming back to this current slide, the question was, so are you saying that that this disaster happened because they broke the laws of the triple constraints?
Well, not exactly because the laws of the triple constraints were broken. Changes happen in a project, and some changes are significant enough to change the triple constraints and the rules of engagement. However, if they don't have the clear linkages between the goals, triple constraints, and the plans, and those linkages are broken, then that's when the project is deemed for failure. So they weren't able to link back up to the goals and revisit the goals. I'm going to show you what happened. As we go through, let's look at what actually went wrong here with the shuttle disaster. Here's the goal statement. The Space Shuttle Program goal is to establish a national space transportation capability that will substantially reduce the cost of space operations and support in a wide range of scientific, defense, and commercial uses. Now, looking at that goal statement, how would you interpret that? The interpretation, I'm willing to guess that each and every one of us would have a slightly different interpretation of this particular goal. And what happens in an organization when it's not a clear goal is that the communication and the control starts to weaken, and it starts to migrate down to the natural levels of the organization. So we see the technical layer looking at this and reading into it. It's required for a wide range of uses. So we have to, provide all sorts of different flexibility within this, within the shuttle program. The operational layer is focusing on reducing cost, and they're trying to maximize the reduction of costs. And then the executive layer, with all its authority, is reading into it on-time delivery. And so, although launches were happening on schedule, warning signs were being missed and misunderstood or outright ignored because of the gaps in the communication layers. We have the operational layer, they were reporting cost overruns and typical delays of 84% in the project. And we saw that control was starting to move down into the technical layers, such as the Utah plant or the Hydropack Incorporated, which made the O-ring seals. In this case, it was communicated verbally and vocally to their managers that it was extremely unsafe under the expected conditions to launch. Two of the engineers were even so hot about it that they were pounding on the tables with their fists. But the more important message from those engineers didn't get to Florida. NASA, who were very hot to trot with the schedule, they read into a more formal report from the engineers a different message, one that said that they didn't really know the risk and their launch went forward as scheduled. So let's take this and move it into a more ITILized kind of world and do a case study with a company called Mir. I'd like to make note that Mir is a totally fictional company, and any resemblance to any real company, alive or dead, is purely coincidental. Now, Mir has been going through a lot of challenges over the last few years. Customer surveys were indicating that there's a drop in satisfaction that paralleled the decline, and they had very unexcited. The recent product launches were extremely unexcited, lots of bugs and delays, and something had to be done. So the executive board quickly sent out a mandate out to their associates and staff that we must ensure our next release of the Red Cherry phone wows our customers with a flawless deployment. And they assigned the product director to be the sponsor on this initiative. And the sponsor then took this and lined it up and presented the rules of engagement, negotiated and presented the rules of engagement as such. We will maximize the performance on this project, where the Red Cherry phone will have to wow our customers. If we do not have a flawless deployment, we should not deploy at all. Cost, we'll try to find cost wherever we can. We just must make sure that this is working. And the schedule is constrained to our next release, which is expected in the fourth quarter of next year. But Mir has been in trouble over the last little while, and there was a lot of other influences that are going on across the organization. But they wanted to align to the rules of engagement. So the operational influences, as tough as they are, they're saying, yes, performance is understood. We have to make sure that it's an absolute success. So we want to install a new software tool and ensure that there is some automation in place. We have fewer people to do the work, and we need to have things automated. Cost is going to be extremely tight. You know, they'll have a hard time finding the budget. And resources, we've lost a lot of people, so that's going to be a huge constraint and restriction on this project. And the schedule is actually early Q4, not late Q4, so we are quite constrained on the schedule. The technical influences came up with gathering a lot of technical requirements, and what was key to them was that they needed a release management system that was to be in place. We should be doing an RFP to find cost savings and reassign key personnel to this project, and we need lots and lots of time for testing and training to make sure it will not fail. So the project manager then took all the requirements, pulled it all together. He's got his rules of engagement and designed a performance-driven plan and began executing on it. Of course, in this case, the inevitable happens and a project crisis occurs. So here's another example of change in the middle of a project. A major competitor now launches a new Y phone in September. and the executives start to panic, and they say we have to move up our product launch to August. And the project manager is getting the direction from the sponsor now to move up our project to allow the launch in July of the project transition, and then the launch of their new phone in time for before the Y-phone goes in. So of course the PM's response, he pulls out his contingency plan. He begins, looking at ways to crunch his schedule and add people, which is an increasing cost, and reducing testing, which is going to possibly impact performance. But the rules of engagement have changed. And if he continues on this path, I'm willing to say that failure would be inevitable. So what will happen, or should happen with Mir, is that he begins communicating at the level of focusing on the drivers of the project, that the project is red due to the performance impact. And by raising the red flag, the executive team then looks at this and says, we need to start over. We need to reestablish and revisit our rules of engagement. So we take a look at the goal statement and revisit the goal statement. Now in this case, the Mir executive wanted to keep their goal statement. They felt that it was imperative that the next product launch must wow their customers. We then revisit and look at the rules of engagement against that goal. And it was decided that the primary driver of performance is still the primary driver. However, the shareholders are resisting, and they're resisting any new influx of money. And with share prices down, they just can't afford any more money on this project. So now this project is becoming cost constrained. So finally, the project manager revisits all the milestones of the project based on the new rules of engagement of still a performance-driven project, but cost-constrained. He tweaks the plan and then begins to continue execution on the plan, on the revised plan. And we continue to measure the progress with status reports aligned to the rules of engagement. And as we continue on, we hope that Mir's decision to constrain budget and accept schedule was the right one for success. Their performance is on schedule, but their deliverables are now starting to show a little bit of slowness, and they continue moving forward.
Mike, we have I think a comment / question, some clarification on the Cotter comment. So Cotter is integrated into ITIL in both service transition and continual service improvement, really talking about organizational change. So I'm wondering if you could make the connection between this, the effect projects have, or the relationship between projects and change management, and the necessity for establishing quick wins in any project to help facilitate that organizational change. I'm paraphrasing. I hope our participant appreciates it. maybe I'm off base.
Okay, so yeah, and the principle of organizational change. So establishing quick wins. This is does not change that need and the importance for that. So as you're moving forward, if you have a clear goal in place and your rules of engagement are clear and aligned to those goals, then it allows you to then break up the project into the pieces that you need to have small continuous improvements, and you'll continually be able to revisit or reestablish each of the sub-projects with the right targets and goals in mind. So I use as the example the landing on the moon. There was numerous sub-projects, the Mercury and Gemini projects that took place prior to Apollo, but each one of them, they had the same rules of engagement that was consistently applied through the whole project. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely connects. I have a question. Actually, this one's coming from me as having been on both sides of the fence, I guess, trying to run projects, but also as an owner/entrepreneur of a business. If we drop through to the reality of all this, what I typically see, and I've got lots of experience also consulting with organizations on ITIL, maybe not the sponsor, but certainly the funders and executives, quite often, for example, in response to your case study, will shoot the messenger or just don't want to hear. So what they'll come back and say is, yeah, that's really interesting theory, but we believe that you should still be able to perform on time with the budget that you have. Go figure it out. I'm sure you've seen that situation too. What as a consultant do you recommend happens in that sort of real life scenario?
Well, I'd like to refer to how some of the consulting companies manage that challenge in certain ways, and they build it into the assumptions that they create within their contracts. So, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily the correct way to do this, but what they do is they understand that there needs to be they need to run their project and based on the knowledge of what is the key driver of the project. And so they will build into the contract assumptions such as, if these things happen, then we will apply additional cost onto, these will be change requests that will result in additional time and money. And if the sponsor accepts those kind of assumptions, then the sponsor is basically saying that I want this project to be a performance-driven project. I sort of read into that. So the sponsor sometimes may not be aware of what he's signing off on when he's entering into some of these contracts. Or the project manager, if it's his own project manager, may build into his plan certain assumptions that here's the contingency if certain risks occur. I will extend the project by time, to allow for a loss of people and, my certain key resources. If I happen to lose a certain key resource in my project, I will spend the time on the project to find a new person. I will not increase costs or the performance on the project. If you see that into the plan, then basically you're creating a performance-driven plan. So it's how those plans are designed, how the risks and the assumptions are built into the plan that actually tells you, what the drivers are, what the rules of engagement are. The problem is that too often, we're not clear enough with that. So we build it in, and we don't clearly state that because we built these assumptions in here, this project is a performance-driven project, and if any contingencies or if any of the risks are realized, we will start executing on that risk management plan that's going to raise costs or extend schedule. Are you aware of that? Will you accept that?
Very good. So it sounds like you're saying there's a level of A, objectivity, and B, a very high level of communication, and pushing the accountability and responsibility for those decisions back to the sponsors and funders.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We do have a couple of comments and questions. I think you're near the end of the presentation, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Want to be conscious of our time. We are at about 12:45, so we'll continue with questions and wrap things up in 5 minutes or so, probably. But I think we've woken up a number of participants. So one comment was getting that type of response or understanding is a critical aspect of ITIL, and then in both customer value. And so I think that was in relation to the discussion you were just having. Then there's a question, where/how does MIR get customer input to clearly define what WOW means? That's the killer.
Good question. And that is, that is something that, should be clarified from the project manager's view as he starts building down the guidelines of or the requirements of the project. And yes, that may be a statement saying maybe that goal statement could be a little bit clearer. And maybe we can, that's something that the executive team can say, well, maybe there's a different way of wow, how do we wow? Or maybe it's just a matter of a sub-definition saying WOW means this in this customer satisfaction survey.
Right. So would that also be, Mike, a better or more detailed definition of performance and what successful performance looks like? So I would suspect in this kind of example that might come from the marketing department or marketing research or customer surveys, as you said.
Yes.
And you're saying that it would also be linked to the goal statement?
It definitely needs to link to the goal statement, as in that as you communicate, when you say wow, I think the whole project team needs to understand what wow means. So using the word wow is fine so long as everybody understands what that means in those terms. So they can relate the performance measures against that.
Very good. All right. I don't think we have any more questions. Mike, if you could just advance to the last slide, just to be a quick reminder of what's coming up next week. And once again, thanks everyone for participating today. We do have a few more minutes. If there are any other questions, please feel free to pose those. And once again, a big thank you to Mike. Very interesting. And I know for me, very near and dear to my heart, running lots of projects all the time. As I said, as both a provider and as a business owner, I can certainly relate to these concepts, and personally found it very helpful.
Oh, great. And I hope others did too.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so we'll wrap it up here. Thanks very much again, Mike, and we look forward to everyone joining us on Tuesday, December the 11th for Pete McGarrahan and Malcolm Fry.